things as, someday this bubble might burst. Someday the stock market may not be as good as it is now. And he began to say maybe we ought to start investigating companies, see what they're actually worth, see what their assets are, see what the stock's selling for, see what the dividends are, and start making our decisions based upon actual knowledge and fact rather than on pure speculation. Now, being a good alcoholic, he said to those that had money, I don't have any money to do this, but if you'll finance me, I'll go do it and I'll bring back the reports to you. And they said to Bill, no, thank you, Bill, we don't need to do that. We're making all the money that we need to make. We see no need for expenditures of that kind. And again, being a good, stubborn, bull-headed, hard-headed alcoholic, Bill said, well, to hell with them. I'll just go anyhow. So he took his $1,000 that he had made, and he and Lois began to go on a little journey. He said, we gave up our positions and off we rode on a motorcycle, a sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I'd had some success in speculation, so we had a little money. But we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. I have no trouble identifying with Bill Wilson. Bill went back to Wall Street and showed those people the reports, and they said, oh, yeah, Bill, yeah. Now we see what you're talking about. Sure, this is good information. And they put old Bill on a payroll, gave him a large expense account. He exercised an option, and suddenly Bill is rolling in clover. Now, he came from a little town up in East Dorset, Vermont, and he really didn't have any money, had never had any money, so now he's riding on top of the world. He said, my judgment ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important, exhilarating part in my life. Now, Bill doesn't know he's alcoholic. He knows he loves to drink, and he also notices that it's becoming more and more important to him. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spending thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. Now, being a good alcoholic, naturally his disease is progressive, so his drinking's going to get worse. He said, my drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. And how many of us have done the same thing? People begin to say to Bill, you're drinking too much. Bill, you're costing us money. Bill, you're making bad decisions while drunk. Bill, why don't you cut down on your drinking? Bill, why don't you quit? And Bill finally said, to hell with them, and just withdrew within himself and began to operate as a lone wolf. Almost all of us eventually reached that stage. He said there'd been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. I've always believed everything Bill Wilson wrote. I'm not sure about that last statement, I think that would depend upon what he means by real infidelity. Lois had some different ideas anyhow in some of her writings. On page 4, Bill says, abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of the tape which bore the inscription XYZ32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. Well, that disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock, so what? Tomorrow was another day, and as I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. And how many of us have done the same thing? You know, we've come out of the hospital or the jailhouse or the divorce court, and we feel low, sad, and depressed. And we stop in the bar and we have a drink or two, and as we do, the old fierce determination to win comes back, and we say, to hell with them. They're not going to do me that way. And we're off and we're running again. Next morning I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I'd better go to Canada. By the following spring we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba, no St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go, and this time we stayed broke. Over on page 5, we see the progression to the point of where we're now drinking because we have to. We're no longer drinking for fun or excitement. We're now drinking to live. He said liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by half a dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. And there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. Remember last night, Dr. Silkworth said, we really cannot differentiate the true from the false. To us, what we're doing is absolutely normal. You and I can see Bill's life going to hell in a handbasket already, but Bill can't see that. He still thinks he can control the situation. Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. That's a story within itself. You know, Bill was very good at this stock changing or trading or buying and speculating or whatever you want to call it. And people loved to work with Bill and use his mind. And even though Bill was having trouble with alcohol, people still respected his abilities. And he'd put together another one of these deals where they were going to make a lot of money out of it. And the people that had the money that backed him said, Bill, we're going to back you on one condition, that you don't drink. And Bill said, don't worry, I'm through with that drinking. But a night or two before this deal was to be successfully consummated, they were in a hotel room. Somebody passed around a bottle of Applejack. It came by Bill, and he said, no, thank you, I'm not drinking. The second time it came by him, his mind said, one little drink of Applejack wouldn't hurt anybody. He took a drink, he triggered the allergy, he could not stop drinking, and he blew the whole deal. Now the importance in that is in the next statement. He said, I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. You know, Bill, for the first time, could differentiate the true from the false. For the first time, he could see what alcohol was doing to him. And he made up his mind he was going to quit drinking forever. Now, Bill had a tremendous amount of willpower. He is a self-made man. He could do about anything he wanted to do. You know, many people say to we alcoholics that we are weak-willed people. No, that isn't our problem. Our problem is that we are strong-willed people. We are so strong-willed we damn near kill ourselves trying to find a way to drink. Weak-willed people do not become alcoholic. You know, the third time they vomit, they quit drinking. The alcoholic says there's got to be a way to drink without puking, and we spend the rest of our life trying to find it, see. And Bill was very strong-willed, and he assumed now that he wanted to quit drinking, all he had to do was use his willpower. He said, shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve, I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksuredness. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. I have no trouble identifying with Bill Wilson. Last paragraph, page 6. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative, and this combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity, so did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. Now we see a guy that is dying from the disease of alcoholism. He's 40 pounds underweight, he's dying from malnutrition, and unless something takes place in his life pretty fast, Bill's not going to be with us much longer. Surely we can see another alcoholic, and surely we can see the progression of the disease of alcoholism. Joe?
Okay, my brother-in-law is a physician, and this is Bill's brother-in-law, Dr. Leonard Strong. And through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a national hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. This was the town's hospital. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mal-exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I was seriously ill bodily and mentally. And this is Bill, and Bill met Dr. Silkworth at the town's hospital in 1933. It's the summer of 1933. And he explained to Bill what we talked about in the doctor's opinion last night. He explained to Bill about the allergy of his body and his idea about the obsession of the mind. And this had a great impact on Bill. He said, it relieved me somewhat to learn that in the alcoholic, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. You know, Bill had been baffled by why willpower hadn't worked. And Dr. Silkworth's explanation explained some things to Bill. He said, my incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. He said, understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. You know, that means he was doing pretty good. That's kind of a slang expression. So I went to town regularly, even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital, and this is back again a year later, 1934. He's back in the town's hospital. This was the finish of the curtains, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed it would all end in heart failure or delirium tremens. I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum, and Bill overheard Dr. Silkworth talking to Lois. He said, they did not need to tell me. He said, I knew, and I almost welcomed the idea. Well, this is devastating. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who thought so well of myself and my abilities and my capacities to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Here was a man of great willpower. He said, now was a plunge in the dark, joining the endless procession of sights who had gone on before. I thought of my wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. And listen real carefully at this next paragraph. It's one of my favorites in the book. It says, no words can tell the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. You know, I've never seen a more beautiful explanation of step one, where we admitted he was powerless over alcohol and that his life had become unmanageable. This is where Bill took step one. Now, step one hadn't been written, but we see this is the concept. This is where Bill Wilson took step one. Right after he left, he was in the Towns Hospital on the second trip.
Now, if that should happen to you or I today, probably we would say, well, I guess I better go to AA.
Yeah.
But Bill didn't have any AA to go to. He was in one of the best-known treatment facilities in the country at that time. So when he left the hospital with no place else to go, he said, "Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted in what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Near the end of that bleak November, and I imagine it was a pretty bleak November, he took a drink on November the 11th. He triggered the allergy. He couldn't stop drinking. We've been drunk now ever since. He said, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. Now, we know that Bill is talking about Ebby Thatcher. And we know that Bill and Ebby had gone to school together some, and they had done some drinking together. And Bill hadn't seen Ebby sober in years and years. And all of a sudden, here's Ebby in New York City, and not only is he in New York City, but he's sober. And the last Bill had heard about Ebby is that he was to be committed to the state insane asylum in the state of Vermont for alcoholic insanity. Now, that's what they used to do with people like us. Before the treatment centers and the facilities we have today, they used to haul us in front of a judge, and the judge would commit us to the state insane asylum for an undetermined period of time for alcoholic insanity. You know, it seems as though up in Vermont, Ebby's father had passed on, and the family had taken Ebby as the black sheep and put him in one of the old summer homes in Vermont. And they said, Ebby, you can stay here as long as you want to, providing you keep the place up. Do a little painting and a little cleaning up, and you can stay here rent-free. Well, Ebby had been doing a little painting, and he had been there staying rent-free, and he had set the place on fire twice, drunk. And one day after doing some painting, the pigeons lit on the roof, and they began to crap on the house. And he grabbed his shotgun and ran outside shooting pigeons, drunk. And it also let him have one of his father's old cars. And one day while driving the car, drunk, he ran into the neighbor's house. In fact, he ran into the neighbor's kitchen. In fact, the car went all the way in the kitchen, and the lady of the house was there also. And Ebby stepped out of the car, doffed his hat, said, "Good morning, madam. 'Twould be a fine day for a cup of coffee, would it not?" Now, some judge with no sense of humor was about to put him in a nut house. And that's the last Bill had heard about Ebby. He said, I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and I can drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we'd chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility, the very thing an oasis drinkers are like that. The door opened, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table and he refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. Oh, damn, I'm glad that didn't happen in my kitchen. I have no idea what I would have done. But here's what Ebby did, or what Bill did. Joe?
Okay. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot, now I suspect a little cracked about religion. He had a starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire. Bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. This is, Ebby had gotten into this. They were trying to commit Ebby, and Roland and some people from the Oxford groups had heard about Ebby. So there was two other guys. There was actually three. They went down to talk to the judge, and Roland actually told the judge his story. He told the judge what he was like and what happened and what his life was like. And then they turned Ebby over to him. He took Ebby to his home and kept him a couple of weeks, and then he took him into Sam Shoemaker's mission, the head where the Oxford groups was centered. And Ebby was there really working with other people. He wasn't there. He was considered to be one of the backbones of at that time, because after all, he had had 3 months sobriety. And while there, working with other people, he went down on Wall Street as he used to mess around. He spent some time down there and he heard about Bill. And he hadn't seen him for a while, and he heard about his situation, so he called him and he said, I wonder if he would be interested in this new thing that I have found in the Oxford groups. So when he went over to see Bill, and here's what he brought to Bill. He brought to Bill a simple religious idea. Now remember, over here on the other page, Bill had already taken step one. He had seen that he was been defeated. He was powerless over alcohol, but he didn't have a solution. Ebby brought him a simple religious idea, which is the idea of the spiritual experience, that came from Roland, that came from Dr. Carl Jung, that finally became step two. And he brought him the practical program of action. He brought him the program of the Oxford groups, the recovery steps that later become our steps of recovery, 3 through 12. He brought him he had the problem, Ebby brought him the solution and the planned program of recovery. So finally, he had all three pieces of the puzzle. When Ebby came into his kitchen, he had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. He said, I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was a profit temperance pledge I had never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folks and their doing. His insistence that the spirits really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past, and they made me swallow hard. Now, I would have to remember when Ebby walked into Bill's kitchen, and at this time, Ebby was involved in the Oxford groups. And as Frank said last night, the Oxford groups were people that were trying to regrasp or obtain first century Christianity. In fact, their first name was a first century Christian fellowship. And so when Ebby had been involved in the Oxford groups, and the Oxford groups, their language was very religious. It was not God as you understand him like we hear today. It was a strict religious message. And Bill did not like that. And Bill did not like Ebby's approach. And because he had been raised by his grandfather, and he had been influenced, and he had some early concepts about these things that he did not like. And he's no different than any other alcoholic when we approach with certain things. He did not like Ebby's approach.
Bill said, I'd always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. For that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had a little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him, his moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. I have no trouble identifying with Bill Wilson. Middle paragraph. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. You see, this is where the identification process is so important. Bill knew about Ebby, and he knew how Ebby drank, and he knew Ebby was powerless. And if Ebby wasn't drinking, some power other than Ebby had to take place, or something happen in Ebby's life greater than Ebby's power. Page 12. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me in the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. Now, apparently they were sitting there and doing a little arguing or some deep discussion on these religious terms and religious ideas. And apparently Ebby finally got tired of it. In the next statement, which is in italics that we love to refer to as squiggly writing, we'll notice that usually squiggly writing in the book is pretty important. Ebby said to Bill, well, why don't you choose your own conception of God? In other words, he said, Bill, what are we arguing about? What difference does it make whether we call him God, universal mind, spirit of nature, creative intelligence, Yahweh, Mohammed, Buddha? He said, why don't you just choose your own conception of God? Now, the instant he said that, his message changed from a religious message to a spiritual message. You see, religion says this is the way you have to believe. Spirituality says you can believe any way you want to. The main question is, do you believe? And Bill said that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I'd lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Now, we believe that this is when Bill took step 2. He came to believe that a power greater than himself could restore him to sanity. Ebby let him believe that by this little statement. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? You'll notice also he refers to that as a foundation of complete willingness. He said, upon that foundation I might build what I saw in my friend. Now, this is Bill's first reference to a wonderfully effective spiritual structure. Bill loves to teach us by painting pictures in our minds with words. And all the way through the book, he's going to refer it to a spiritual structure. And certain points he makes, certain things we do, will be a part of that structure. The foundation of it is this idea of being willing to believe. Willingness came through step one, where we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. That and that alone caused us to be willing to believe in another power. So willingness is the foundation of this wonderfully effective spiritual structure. We'll refer to it some more later on. Bill has now taken steps 1 and 2. They were not written in those days, but surely we can see him taking these steps.
Says, thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes, and a new world came into view. This is where he took step 2. Now remember, he was in the grips of this 3-week drunk. He attempted to go to some meetings with during this time, and each time he went, he was drinking. One time he was on the way and he left about midday, going to a meeting that night. I don't know why he left so early, but he went by several bars because he had plenty of time. And he met this third guy in the bar, and he started telling him where he was going, and they was drinking, so both of them went to the meeting, and they almost caused some trouble, and Ebby had to give Bill and this guy some coffee and beans and sobered them up, and Bill came out in the meeting and made a great big testimony, and it was one of them kind of things, a drunk at the meeting. But finally, Bill got down, and as Frank said the other day, he had to go back to the hospital. And I think that's December the 10th, I believe that's today, this morning, like a day like today, 54 years ago, Bill went back to the town's hospital after he got down on this last drunk.
We're talking about 54 years ago today.
54
Bill
years
went back to the town's hospital.
For the last time. And he said at the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. Now, let's see what he did. That's what happened at the hospital. He said, there I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and directions. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing. Without him I was lost.
Surely this is when Bill took step 3. Here's where he made his decision to turn his will and his life over to the care of God as he understood him. No step 3 written in those days. But remember, he has the tenets, the steps, the guidelines from the Oxford groups. And this is a part of their practical program of action. Later turned out to be step 3.
I ruthlessly faced my sins.
This is where he took step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
And became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. I have not had a drink since.
This later turned out to be steps 6 and 7, was entirely ready to have God remove these things and humbly ask him to do so.
My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies.
Here's where he took step 5 with Ebby. Ebby came to visit with him in the hospital, and Bill took step 5 with him, admitted to Ebby the exact nature of his wrongs.
We made a list of people I had hurt and to whom I felt resentments, and I expressed my willingness to approach these individuals admitting my wrongs. Never that I was to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability.
Surely we see Bill dealing with steps 8 and 9, making a list of all people we'd harmed and became willing to make amends to them and made direct amends to such people wherever possible.
I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense.
Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it.
I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself except my request bore my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, and that would be in great measures.
Surely this later turned out to be step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out.
My friend promised, when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, and I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems.
Golly, this must be the first part of step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps.
Now we can see that actually Bill recovered as a result of the steps that he took with Abby in the hospital. Now these steps this happened in 1934. This is the first thing that Bill wrote when he started on it, I believe in 37. And we can see here as he wrote Bill's story, he had written the steps within his story. Although it was a year later before he wrote the steps, but we can see the steps in Bill's story a year before the steps were actually written. He recovered the results of the steps. He took the steps. He got the information from Silkworth, the information from Abby, and the planned program of the Oxford groups. And as he applied this, he recovered as a result of the steps.
That's why he could say in How It Works in the Big Book, these are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. You know, many people think Bill just recovered in a blinding flash of light and really did nothing for that. But we can see that Bill took the steps also, just like the rest of us. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Poor old alcoholic, in order for us to recover, we got to give up the two things we hold nearest and dearest to our heart. First is we got to give up on alcohol, and second, we got to give up on self. Very simple idea, but extremely hard to do. Bill said these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I'd never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but His impact on me was sudden and profound. Now, Bill thought he was going crazy. He said, for a moment I was alarmed and called my friend the doctor to ask if I were still sane. And he listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, something has happened to you I don't understand, but you'd better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were. Now, of course, we don't know for sure what happened to Bill that day. We were not there. But we do know this. This was probably December the 12th, 13th, 14th, somewhere along in there of 1934. And we do know that Bill didn't die until January of 1971. And we do know that he never had to take another drink of alcohol as long as he lived. Something profound took place in his life that day in the town's hospital, and he recovered from the disease of alcoholism. He always referred to it as a vital spiritual experience, where old ideas were cast aside and replaced with a new set of ideas. And it wasn't necessary for him to drink anymore. So certainly we can see Bill's recovery. Now, if we've read and studied Bill's story, and if we're alcoholic like Bill is, and we've identified with Bill, we've been able to see we have the same problem he's got. We've been able to see our powerlessness over alcohol. We've been able to see the progression of our disease. We've been able to see the unmanageability of our life just as Bill's became unmanageable. And then we saw Bill recover. Now at this point we're probably beginning to think, I'm enough like him, that if he could recover from this thing, maybe I can also. The beginning of belief, the beginning of hope. Now in Bill's story we have seen two factors work here. Number one, we saw the beginning of a fellowship. We saw two people working together, Bill and Ebby. They were the fellowship in the fall of 1934. And we can see and we know that there's great power gained from one human being who's had a problem and has recovered from it, sharing with another human being. That's one of the first things Ebby brought to Bill, was the power in his fellowship. The second thing we saw take place in Bill's life is a vital spiritual experience. Recovery through spiritual means. So we saw two powers work in Bill's life. One, fellowship. One, spiritual experience. Now, Bill surely figured at the end of his story that he hadn't gone into this deep enough for us to really understand what took place. And this great clean wind of a mountaintop that blew through and through kind of sounds like something that happens way out there to other people. And I'm almost sure he said, maybe I better explain to them exactly what took place. And he wrote another chapter, and he called it, There Is a Solution. And in the next chapter, he describes the solution to the disease of alcoholism, and he shows us the two powers that worked in his life, fellowship and spiritual experience. Joe?
Okay, there is a solution. As we say now that we have the problem, we're looking at the solution, which is step 2. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. Now he's describing the fellowship as it existed then and as it exists today. And we are average Americans. We come from all sections of this country, and many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. You know, when we look at the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, it is probably one of the most mixed up group of people in the world. Strange, isn't it? Usually people, when they come together in groups, we have a fellowship, but if it's usually people like at a church or wherever, they usually have something in common. You know, they maybe have the same job, the same political viewpoint, or the same religion, or the same cause. Usually there is something that brings people together. But the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous has none of those things. You know, none of those of us here this weekend should have never met the other. That's strange. We have nothing in common, really. We should have lived our lifetime and never knew each other. He says we are normally people who would not mix. This is strange. Just like this weekend, if we took Alcoholics Anonymous out of our midst, or an AA, and didn't talk about that this weekend, I wonder what we would talk about. I doubt if we could carry on a decent conversation. Okay. So we are so different, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We're so close, though, yet so different, but so close. And he goes on to explain, well, he uses an illustration, and again throughout the book we'll be talking about how Bill uses parables to teach. He says, we are like the passengers on the great liner the moment after rescue from the shipwreck, when camaraderie, joy, and mockery pervade the vessel from the steerage to the captain's table. And he said, they were like the passengers on this great liner, and this is the way in those days. This was still, you know, when the book was written in 1939, they still had the great ocean liners. This was right, the Titanic was fresh on people's minds. This was a great illustration. And when these people traveled on the great ocean liners, there was a distinct separation of people. People were separated on the ocean liners by money, economics. They were separated on it by politics. They were separated by the social backgrounds. They were separated because of religion. And there was a distinct, it wasn't like first class and second class. There were many, many different classes. There was a long way from the captain's table down to the steerage section. And here was this poor immigrant probably traveling across in the steerage section. Man, ain't no way he'd have met that guy at the captain's table. I mean, that guy at the captain's table was in high cotton. He's traveling first class. And this guy was down here, and he was up there he was under the chandeliers and all the music and all the fine food. And this guy down in the steerage section was probably eating a cheese sandwich. Yeah. Now, they should have took their whole journey and never met each other. They should have never met each other on that vessel. And they had nothing in common. Until the night they hit that iceberg. And when they jumped overboard, as soon as they hit that water, they had something in common. No, they had a common problem. And I'm sure that guy from the captain's table never did take a financial statement from that guy that night. He didn't have time for that. They were trying to save their behinds. And they came together, and they were bound together because of a common problem. This is what is so beautiful about Alcoholics. We don't care where you work. We don't care what you do, what's your occupation, what's your social background. That's what binds us together here in Alcoholics Anonymous. The beauty of it is a common problem. This is what binds us. And I think this is one of the great powers. There's a lot of power in this fellowship. Alcoholics Anonymous is very therapeutic to be with other people who have recovered from the same thing that you have. Alcoholics Anonymous is a support group. It's a strength group. There's a lot of therapy just in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is part of that power. So unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. You know, those people went back, after they were rescued, they went back to their other ways of life, but we will always be alcoholics. The feeling of having shared a common peril is one element in the powerful cement that binds us. You know, the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is a powerful thing. And this is part of that power. The feeling of having shared a common peril, of being with other people who have the same problem. This is part of that. But then he says, but that in itself will have never held us as we are now joined. You know, the fellowship is great. The fellowship is very supportive. The fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what the new person gets when he comes in the door. That is great. He said, but that would have never held us as we are now joined. And it's really a warning in the big book. You know, the earlier people in AA, I remember the first 100 people, they didn't have a problem with some of the problems we have today. Well, they don't have some of the traps that we can get into. See, they did not have a lot of fellowship. They had some few meetings, but there was no way you could go to 90 meetings in 90 days. They did not depend on just going to meetings. And since we have grown now and have so many meetings, there are a lot of people just get caught up in the trap of going to meetings, living off of one part of the recovery program, fellowship and fellowship and fellowship and fellowship. But he said that would have not held us as we are now held. You know, going to 90 meetings in 90 days will not get you sober. No more than if you go to the PTA meeting, 90 PTA meetings in 90 days, it would not make you a parent, would it? I mean, it really would. You know, you could go down to the hospital every morning to the staff meeting and sit in on it. But if you didn't participate in their program, you'd be in a hell of a shape, you know, if you were sick. So we get caught up in the trap. Going to meetings is fine. He said that we have to have the fellowship. That is the great vessel. When we wouldn't have a program without the fellowship. Let's don't get that straight. We have to have the fellowship. But the other thing that we seem to be lacking, we're getting more and more fellowship, and a lot of us are missing the real solution. He goes on to say, the tremendous fact for every one of us that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out of which we can absolutely agree. and which we can join in brotherly harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. Not only do we have a common problem, the news this book carries is a common solution. A common solution. And later on it's going to tell us that our common solution is a vital spiritual experience that will come as a result of working the steps. So on this page, once we see the problem, then we can write the doctor. I love the way this page does. Once the doctor makes a diagnosis and understands the problem, then we can write some prescription. And on this page, we write a prescription. He's telling us right here that the power of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the power of the common solution, which is a vital spiritual experience, these two powers will overcome any one person's powerlessness over alcohol. The power of the fellowship and the power of the common solution will overcome any one person's powerlessness over alcoholism.
The great news this book has to carry for those who suffer from the disease of alcoholism is not only the news of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's the news of the common solution. And I think somewhere down the line, the fellowship began to change.
Yeah.
Now, the book has remained the same, but the fellowship began to change. And people began to find that they could stay dry, not drinking, just by coming to meetings. And they begin to tell other people, all you got to do is go to meetings and you'll be all right. And they begin to say such things as 90 meetings in 90 days, and you'll be okay. Well, we don't see anything wrong with 90 meetings in 90 days. But we do see something wrong with that being all you need to recover from the disease. We begin to hear such things as you can treat it like a cafeteria. Take what you want, leave what you want, and you'll be okay. We begin to hear such things as if you just come to meetings long enough, you'll soak it up by osmosis, and you'll recover from the disease. And none of those things are said in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The big book talks about a common solution upon which we can join together in brotherly and harmonious action. Later on, that's going to turn out to be the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I came to this thing and I tried to soak it up by osmosis, and I had to get drunk 3 more times. And then when I came back and quit trying to soak it up and began to use the 12 steps, then things began to take place in my life. I think the greatest tragedy in the world today is we are frantically searching for other people to come into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we have literally hundreds of thousands sitting around us dying from the disease of alcoholism every day because nobody's telling them about the common solution. We're talking about the fellowship, but we're not talking about the common solution. And if the new people coming to us today, those that are in the fellowship already that are still having problems, if they could see that it takes both, the fellowship and the common solution, then maybe they could recover from the disease also. You know, Joe and I really didn't realize the importance of this page till we did the first one of these in more or less a formal setting. This was back in about 1977. And just prior to that time, I'd had a little trouble with my ticker back in 1977. And Joe and I were scheduled to go to Lawton, Oklahoma and do a little big book study. First time we'd ever done that in a group setting. Now, remember, Joe called me and he said, "Charlie, what do you think? You think we can go?" And I said, "Well, Joe, we need to go. We've committed ourselves and we should be there." And he said, "Well, let me bring my car and I'll do the driving and you can rest." And I said, "That's fine." Now, Joe drives from his home 225 miles from where I live. And we get in his car and we start from my home to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, you can tell by looking at us that we're people that normally would not mix. You know, after all, he's bald-headed and I'm not. There's quite a difference. Now, another guy that had sat in with us from the very beginning, a fellow named Tony Vargas, wanted to go to Lawton with us, and we said, "Tony, meet us at the Camelot Hotel in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We'll leave your car in the parking lot and you can go with us." He said, "Fine." We got to Tulsa and we picked up Tony. And we started tooling it down the Turner Turnpike from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Oklahoma City. Now, the black guy's driving, the Mexican is riding shotgun, and the honky's laying in the back seat sound asleep. And we get out to Lawton, Oklahoma, and we're doing the Big Book study, and we got to this page, and I looked on the front row, and the whole front row was filled with Indians from the Anadarko Indian Reservation. That day we realized what this thing is meaning. We are people who would not mix with each other. But there does exist among us a fellowship which is indescribably wonderful, and it is so wonderful that we begin to think that's all you got to do. Just keep coming to meetings and you'll be all right. And the book said that isn't true. It says that's one element in a powerful cement which binds us together, but the other element in the cement is a common solution. That's the great news this book carries to those who suffer. Now, the first half of this chapter explains why that statement is true. In the first half of this chapter, it talks about people like us, talks about why we're powerless, talks about why we'll have to have it power greater than human power to recover. And it does so by describing we alcoholics. If you go over to page 20 for just a moment, we'll see him beginning to describe three types of drinkers. Page 20, he says, you may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you're curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you're an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. Before going into a detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times people have said to us, I can take it or leave it alone, why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fella can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl, I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him, but there he is, all lit up again. I've heard every one of those observations. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. Now, he's going to describe two drinkers that these observations would refer to. He says moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. Remember we talked about them last night? Slightly tipsy, out of control, nauseous feeling. Alcohol is not such a big deal for them.
That's right.
If they want to stop drinking and they've got a reason for it, they have little trouble in quitting entirely. Those observations would refer to the moderate, social, temperate drinker. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit bad enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. Although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. The heavy or hard drinker is a guy or a lady that drinks like alcoholics drink. But if a sufficiently strong reason presents itself, they'll do one of two things. They'll either quit drinking entirely, or they'll learn to moderate their drinking. They are not alcoholic, and these observations that we read would apply to them also. You and I see those people all the time. That's the guy that said, when I was in the service, I was an alcoholic also. But when I got married and I joined the church and I quit drinking, and I don't see why in the hell you can't do it too. You know, they drink like us, but they are not alcoholic. And if they need to stop or moderate, they will do so. But what about the real alcoholic? Now, he may start off as a moderate drinker, and many of us did. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. Many of us were periodics. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Now, here's the fellow who's been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He's always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tired at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls a structure down on his head by senseless series of sprees. He's a fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. You know, that chicken farm I used to own, I sold it 3 or 4 years after I got sober. That's been about 15 or 16 years ago when I sold it. I still see the guy that bought it every once in a while, and sometimes he'll wave and he'll say, "Hey, Charlie, we found another one." They're still finding partially emptied bottles of vodka all over that farm. You know, behind the corner post, underneath the big rock in the pasture, in the hollow tree down by the creek. Here the other day, one of them came sliding out of a feed bin. It'd been up there over 15 years, you know. Definitely I have some of these things that indicate I'm alcoholic. As matters grow worse, he begins to use the combination of a high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes a day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative to which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums, a description of the alcoholic. Now, thank God today, through education and through money spent by people other than AA, many of us have learned about our alcoholism before we have to do all of these things that he's described. But certainly if we're alcoholic, we found ourselves in there somewhere. Every one of us can see ourselves in that picture. Now the question is, why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it that he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We're not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little bit can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We're equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. Now, these observations, the ones we've just read, would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic sinner is in his mind rather than in his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he'll offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. You know, strange as it may seem, sometimes we alcoholics do tell the truth. Not too often, but once in a while. I had a lady in Al-Anon the other day. She asked me, she said, her husband's still drinking. She said, "Charlie, all he does is lie, lie, lie." She said, "How can you tell when one of you guys are lying?" I said, "Lady, watch him closely, and if you see his lips moving, he's probably lying to you." And then I said, "Do you want me to tell him, or to tell you how to stop him from lying?" And she said, "Oh yeah, how?" I said, "Don't ask him those stupid questions." And he won't lie. Don't ask him where he was last night. Hell, he don't know. And if he does, he can't tell you. Sure, don't ask him who he was with. He don't know that, and he's not about to tell it either if he does. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. And a truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses which are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they're down for the count. Remember, an obsession of the mind is an idea that overcomes all ideas. And the great idea of the alcoholic is, someday, somehow, I'm going to find a way to drink without getting drunk. Someday, somehow, I'll find a way and I won't be in so much trouble. Someday, somehow. And that obsession is so strong that it overcomes all ideas to the contrary, and we end up drunk over and over and over again. The real problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Page 24, squiggly writing. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. As Joe said last night, the idea of the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks is so strong that it will push aside the idea we can't drink. It'll push aside the idea that last time we went to the hospital, last time we got in trouble. It will simply say, let's have a drink. And when it says that, then willpower is no longer there. Willpower only works when the mind sees something wrong with what it's wanting to do. If it doesn't see anything wrong with it, then willpower is non-existent. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. You know, if you put your hand on a hot stove, chances are you won't go back and repeat that because you remember what it did to you. I know as a kid growing up in the Depression area or era of time, and in the part of the country I lived in, everybody was poor. We didn't know it because we were all that way. And we didn't have such things as hot and cold running water and central heat. We usually had an old wood-burning stove or coal stove. And in the wintertime especially, on every Saturday night, we kids had to have a bath. Whether we needed it or not was beside the point. And Mother would always, in the wintertime, heat the water on the old wood-burning stove, put it in a zinc tub behind the heating stove in the living room, and then each kid take their bath. The oldest one first, the littlest one last. I was the baby of the family. Usually by the time it got time for me to bathe, that old water would be so gray and cruddy looking you didn't hardly want to get in it. But one night I was in that tub behind that stove, and the stove was red hot, and I was taking my bath, and I leaned over, and I stuck my rear against that hot stove. And I've never had anything hurt me like that before then. It raised a blister on my rear about as big as my fist, and the pain was terrible. And you know, I've never had an obsession of the mind to stick my ass on a hot stove. I can remember it today. I feel it just as vividly as if it just happened yesterday. Now, alcohol has burned me over and over and over and over just as bad as that stove ever burned me. But my mind can't remember that. The kind of defense that normally keeps me from getting in trouble is not there when it comes to alcohol. That switch is missing. You know, that piece of information is gone. It just isn't there in my mind. Last paragraph, page 24. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he's probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. Now, if we've placed ourselves beyond human aid, then the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous will not bring about recovery. because the fellowship is made up of a bunch of human beings who are just as powerless as we are. But there is a solution on page 25. There is a solution to that problem of being placed beyond human aid. Joe?
Okay. There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of our shortcomings, which the process requires for a successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, that we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we've been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven and have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence we had not even dreamed. Now he's going to give us the real solution. He gives us a simple kit of spiritual tools, and we know this is a reference to the 12 steps that were laid at our feet. And as the application of these, we found a little bit of heaven, another dimension of living. He said the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experience. This is simply the solution. Now what does this do? He says, which revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. Our attitude changes in the mind. The essential facts of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered our hearts and our lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. And here, as we get into this section, he says spiritual experience. And usually when an alcoholic, if you're new, just like any of us coming to the program, I talk to new people, and we all have the same hang-ups. We come into AA and we hear these things, and it says, well, you have to have spiritual experience. And a person like me who has no background in those areas, I was really frightened when I heard that. And I was afraid, and I was, what is this? This is a lofty term. I have to have a spiritual experience. Well, many readers in the first printing of the Big Red Book, and I think Charlie mentioned is one of the first edition book here up on the table. In the first printing of the Big Book, they did not have an asterisk in their book. And they didn't explain to the reader what, they just said you have to have a spiritual experience. And a lot of readers were very confused with that book. They couldn't, alcoholics, what is a spiritual experience? And they thought maybe it was something that was totally impossible for them to accomplish. And so when they republished the book, on the next edition, when the book came out, they put an asterisk in there, and they put an appendix in the back of the book to help explain spiritual experience in a more detailed way for the reader. Now, appendix is something that always means something that is added to the book to make it more complete. So I think any reader that reads the Big Book that does not understand Appendix 2 has a limited conception of spiritual experience. I don't think he can continue on here unless you really understand what is a spiritual experience.
Better take a break.
Okay. Now? Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break.
I think Dave has an announcement or two to make, and then we'll take off again.
Yes, for those who haven't registered, we will open up registration just before lunch, so you do have your lunch ticket. You're not going to be able to get your lunch without that, so we understand your need there. And Billy will take Gregory's place later to make the final announcements before lunch. Thank you.
On page 25, as it talks about this deep and effective spiritual experience, I think those words were the same as the word allergy. Many of us had a different impression or interpretation of a spiritual experience when we came to AA. And if our interpretation is different than the writers, then of course the information coming through will be garbled information. And I know in my own case, I was raised in a real Southern Baptist church. And in our church, we had what we call quite often Revival Week. And the reason for Revival Week is you're not saving enough souls during the regular church services, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. So you go into services for the entire week. You have church every night of the week. And you don't trust your own preacher. If they were doing a good enough job, you wouldn't have to have Revival Week. So you go out and you get the finest preacher you can find anywhere in the county. And they come in and they preach the sermon, and then those that wish to be saved go to the kneeling bench in front after the sermon, and they pray, and everybody else prays, and they make their confession, and hopefully they're saved. And I'll never forget one night in our church, during Revival Week, the new preacher had come in, and he was preaching the sermon, and he was good. He was so good about halfway through the sermon, you could feel the heat and smell the smoke. You knew what was going to happen. And when he got through with the sermon and he had the altar call, my Aunt Molly, who was a long, tall, slender lady, decided she wanted to be saved. Wonderful lady. Aunt Molly went to the front to the kneeling bench, and she kneeled, and she was praying, and preacher standing there, hand on her head, and he was praying, and everybody in the church praying, and all of a sudden Aunt Molly just fell over sideways on the floor. And she began to kick and began to jerk, and the next thing I knew, she began to speak in a language that I'd never heard before. And suddenly she jumped up and she began to run back and forth through the church house, jumping over the pews, skirt tail never touching the back of a pew. And here I am about 10 or 11 years old, just scared the living hell out of me. And I turned to my dad and I said, "Dad, what's wrong with Aunt Molly?" And he said, "Son, I believe she's having a spiritual experience." Now, I read on page 25 where I got to have one of them damn things, and I said, there ain't no way that's going to happen to me. And I wonder how many of us got turned off by that term. I wonder how many of us laid the book down and never picked it up again. I wonder how many of us died from the disease of alcoholism because we didn't understand what Bill was talking about. You know, in his story, we saw him have that thing, that great flash of light, that great clean wind that blew through and through, and many of us felt we had to have the same thing, and there's no way we could do that. Now, in this book that I have here by me, which is a first printing, first edition of the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous, there was no explanation for spiritual experience in it. And no sooner had they printed it and it began to go out and people began to use it till they realized they were going to have to discuss that a little further, because people like I was misunderstood what they were talking about. So in the second printing of the Big Book, they put the appendix in the back of the book to explain what they mean by spiritual experience. And if we're going to have one, maybe we ought to go back there and see what they're talking about and see if our definition is the same as theirs. Joe?
Okay, as we refer to the bottom of the page, it says fully explained in Appendix 2, page 569. So back on page 569, we're going to look at Appendix 2 on spiritual experience. It begins there. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book. Now he's talking, he says and, so it means two different things we're going to be talking about: spiritual experience and